My parents abandoned me alone in France. No phone, no visa, no money. You heard that right. They left the hotel and handed the front desk a note. This is the punishment for turning your back on family. They thought it was punishment for refusing to invest $100,000 in their golden boy. But what they didn't know was that it was the day I decided to walk away from their lives. For good. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Miller. I'm 35, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer at a leading tech company in San Francisco. As it stands right now, life is what I'd call peaceful. I have a home in the Sunset District with a small backyard garden where I live with my fantastic husband David and our 1-year-old son Sawyer, who's just starting to take his first wobbly steps on those tiny feet. Every morning, I wake up to the sweet giggles of Sawyer and David. That sound never fails to make me smile. It reminds me how meaningful life can truly be. But this happiness didn't come easily. Behind the calm I have now is a painful story I've been trying to bury for the past 3 years. And just 3 days ago, that past came knocking on my door. That afternoon, I was sitting in the playroom with Sawyer when the doorbell suddenly rang, fast and urgent, like someone needed to be let in. A few seconds later, David came in, his voice tight with concern. "Lisa, your parents are at the gate." His words hit me like a bolt of lightning. In that moment, my mind raced. How did they find my new address? Why are they here? What do they want this time? After a moment of hesitation, I decided to face them. I didn't invite them inside. After nearly 10 minutes of talking with me and David, they left quietly, without another word. The purpose of their visit? They wanted a chance to see Sawyer, my son, but we said no. I must take you back to what happened 3 years ago to understand how I could be so firm and cold toward my parents. It was the peak of my career, the moment I had just been promoted to Chief Financial Officer of the company. Coming from a middle-class family in the suburbs of California, I had worked my way up through the ranks of the finance world. Being named CFO of a fast-growing tech company was the well-earned result of years of relentless effort. When my promotion became official, I returned to my parents' house with a big smile and a bottle of champagne to celebrate. When I shared the news, the entire house lit up with excitement. My mom clapped with joy, my dad gave a proud nod, and even Leo, who had always been a little envious of my success, seemed genuinely happy and raised his glass to toast me. In the middle of that joyful moment, my mom brought up the idea of a trip to Paris. Just as I was about to turn it down politely, she looked at me and said, "Ever since we got married, your father and I have always dreamed of visiting Paris at least once in our lives." The look in their eyes, so full of hope and anticipation, made it hard to say no immediately. Instead, I told them I needed some time to think it over. My work schedule was packed at the time, and it would be a significant expense, so I needed to do the math before giving them an answer. After a week of careful thought and financial consideration, I made my final decision. During a family dinner that evening, I announced, "All right, we're going to Paris. We'll stay for 4 days. I'll take care of everything." What happened next truly moved me. My mom wrapped her arms around me tightly. My dad shook my hand with a firm grip, his eyes full of pride. And Leo? He jumped up like an excited kid. Fueled by that excitement, Leo offered, "Let me handle the planning. I'm good at researching trips online, flights, hotels, tours. I've got experience with all that. Just send me the money and I'll take care of everything." I looked at him for a few seconds, then nodded in agreement. A few days later, I wired Leo an enormous sum, nearly $15,000, to cover the trip. That included round-trip tickets for 4, a 5-star hotel in the heart of Paris for 4 days, and guided tours of major attractions. When I sent the money, I genuinely trusted him. I believed that trip would bring our family closer together. What I didn't know was that trusting him would turn out to be the biggest mistake of my life. We arrived at San Francisco International Airport 3 weeks later, ready for our overnight flight to Paris. I remember that moment so clearly. The happiness on my parents' faces made my heart swell. It was their first time flying abroad, and I felt proud to be the one giving them that experience. The flight lasted 11 hours, but none of us could sleep. We were too excited. My mom kept flipping through a Paris guidebook Leo had printed out. My dad was fascinated by the in-flight amenities, and Leo was busy snapping pictures so he could post about the trip. The moment we landed, the first 3 days in Paris felt like something out of a fairy tale. We stayed at a charming boutique hotel in the Marais, with a view overlooking the old streets and signature Haussmann-style buildings. Leo had arranged everything perfectly, from making reservations at renowned restaurants to buying tickets for famous museums. For the first time, I felt I'd made the right call letting Leo handle the plans. Honestly, with my hectic work schedule, I couldn't have pulled it off the way he did. On the first day, we visited the Eiffel Tower. I can still see my mom standing beneath it, staring up like a child witnessing something magical for the first time. She whispered, "Lisa, I can't believe I'm here. Thank you so much." On the second day, we spent the entire morning at the Louvre. Even my dad, a practical man who'd always been focused on work and family, was captivated as we explored the museum. That afternoon, we strolled along the Seine. The golden light of the Parisian sunset reflecting off the historic bridges made the whole city feel like a scene from a romantic movie. Leo suggested we rent a small river cruise boat, and we spent an hour sipping French wine and admiring the city from the water. We had dinner at a cozy little bistro Leo had booked in advance. That evening, the meal, foie gras, duck confit, crème desserts, left my parents wide-eyed with delight. On the third day, we toured the Palace of Versailles. The sheer grandeur and luxury of the place left us all in awe. My mom couldn't stop taking pictures, wanting to capture every second. We rented audio guides and spent the entire day wandering through the grand halls, gardens, and fountains. That night, Leo suggested dinner at a Michelin one-star restaurant he had reserved earlier. It was the most expensive meal we'd ever had as a family, but I didn't mind spending the money, not when I saw how happy my parents were. Throughout the dinner, Leo and my dad kept topping off my glass. Leo smiled when I tried to stop, saying I was getting tipsy. "Come on, Lisa," he said. "This is a special day. How often do we get to sit together like this in Paris? You've got to drink to celebrate." Seeing how joyful everyone was, I didn't say no. I drank more than usual, from aperitifs to wine pairings and finally digestifs. By the end of the night, I was so drunk I nearly fell asleep at the restaurant. When we got back to the hotel, I headed straight to my room and passed out. At that moment, I had no idea that just a few hours later, I'd wake up to betrayal by my own family. The next morning, the final day of our trip, I woke up with a pounding headache. Sunlight poured harshly through the window, stinging my eyes. The clock on the nightstand read almost 10 o'clock a.m., unusually late for someone like me, who normally wakes up at 7. According to our plan, we were supposed to be at Charles de Gaulle Airport by 6 o'clock that evening to catch our flight back to San Francisco. I needed time to pack and check out of the hotel, but the strange silence in the room was the first thing that unsettled me. I called out, "Mom, Dad, Leo?" No answer. I figured maybe they'd gone down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. I tried to reassure myself as I reached for my phone on the bedside table, but it wasn't there. A few seconds later, I shot up in bed. I rechecked the table. Nothing. Thinking it might have fallen, I knelt and looked under the bed, under the furniture. Still nothing. I started opening drawers, searching every corner of the room. That's when I froze. My parents' and Leo's luggage was gone. Only mine remained, neatly packed, as if someone had deliberately rearranged everything. A wave of panic hit me. I checked the pockets of my suit jacket and pants, then dumped out my suitcase. My wallet, my passport, my phone. Gone. I rushed down to the hotel lobby. At the front desk, I spotted David, the brown-haired Frenchman who had impressed me earlier with his fluent English. I walked up to the desk, my face full of panic. "Excuse me, David," I said. "Where's my family? Their bags are gone. They're not in the room." He looked surprised and checked the computer. "They checked out at 5 this morning," he said. "They didn't tell you?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. A few seconds later, he picked up a small white envelope and handed it to me. "They left this for you." I took it and opened it immediately. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one handwritten line. "This is the punishment for turning your back on family." I don't know how many times I read that sentence. Minutes later, I sat on one of the chairs in the lobby, feeling like the world around me was collapsing. No phone, no money, no passport, no credit cards. I was stranded in Paris with nothing, and the flight back to the US would leave without me. But the betrayal wasn't just about being left with nothing. What broke me most was realizing that the people I had loved and trusted more than anyone had coldly planned this. 3 days of joy in Paris had been a carefully staged performance, and I, someone trained to assess financial risks, never saw the trap set by my own family. Seeing me in despair, David stepped out from behind the front desk and walked over to where I was sitting. There was no curiosity or judgment in his eyes, only genuine kindness and quiet concern. In his soft voice, tinged with that unmistakable French accent, he asked, "Miss Miller, is there anything I can do to help? Would you like me to call the police?" Hearing his question, I shook my head and tried to pull my thoughts together. My voice was low when I replied, "No, thank you. I need to get in touch with someone back in the States, but they took my phone and wallet." After listening, David sat down in the chair across from me. His tone was gentle but firm as he offered, "You can use my phone to make the call. I'll help you." His offer felt like a light at the end of a dark tunnel. Without hesitation, he unlocked his phone and handed it to me, saying, "Go ahead and reach out. I'll make you a coffee." Overwhelmed by his kindness, I didn't know what to say. I nodded and took the phone, murmuring a quiet, "Thank you." While David went to make the coffee, I quickly logged into my email and sent a message to Easton, my assistant. In the email, I told him I was stranded in Paris and included David's phone number, which I had just asked for moments before. After hitting send, I still had to wait. But for the first time since I woke up that morning, I felt a small sense of relief. A few minutes later, David returned with a cup of hot black coffee and set it in front of me with a proud smile. "This is the hotel's special French coffee," he explained. "It'll help clear your head." The aroma alone started to calm me. After taking a sip, the intense bitterness jolted me awake. I could feel my mind beginning to clear. Grateful beyond words, I looked at David and said, "Thank you so much. I'll never forget your kindness." He didn't say anything in return, just smiled and nodded professionally. About 5 minutes later, David's phone rang. I knew instantly. It was a call from the U.S. It had to be Easton. As soon as I answered, I summarized the situation as clearly as I could. "I'm in Paris, and I'm in serious trouble. My family abandoned me here. They took my passport, wallet, and phone. I need your help, right away." First, I asked him to contact the bank and freeze all my credit and debit cards. Then, I told him to call the U.S. Embassy in Paris to report my missing passport and arrange for emergency documents. "I'll need a temporary passport to return home," I added. Easton didn't hesitate. "Got it. I'll handle it now. What about cash? Do you need money while you wait?" When he asked about money, I admitted, "Yes, but I have no idea how to receive it without ID." He didn't miss a beat. "I'll go through Western Union or MoneyGram. I can send you money using a code. What's the name of your hotel?" After giving Easton the hotel's full details, I ended the call with deep relief. Help was on the way. All I had to do was wait. Just as I hung up, David approached me again. With a slight lift in my voice, I said, "Thank you. I managed to reach my assistant, but I'll have to stay in Paris for a few more days until I get new documents. I wanted to ask, would the hotel allow me to stay and pay later? I'll have the money in a few hours." He paused momentarily, then gave me an answer I didn't expect. "I'll speak to the manager, but I can lend you money to cover the first few days." His offer felt like a warm breeze brushing against a frozen heart. In this unfamiliar place, abandoned by my blood, a stranger chose to trust and help me. Right then and there, I promised myself I would never forget his kindness. Later that same morning, David also helped me contact the police. I gave them a full report of everything that had happened. David stayed by my side and even agreed to serve as a witness. After the police left, I sat alone in my hotel room, waiting for Easton to call back. As the silence settled in, I started piecing everything together, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how carefully I had been played. The night before, Leo and my father had kept pouring drinks on me. At the time, I thought it was their way of celebrating our last night in Paris. But now it was clear. They'd gotten me drunk on purpose. It was all part of the plan. And the reason behind it all traced back to something that happened 3 months earlier, a decision I had made, that Leo never forgave me for. I remembered that day clearly. I hadn't yet been promoted to CFO. Leo came to see me with our parents, pitching a new investment opportunity. My brother had always been drawn to get-rich-quick ideas, and this one was no different. As soon as they walked in, Leo, full of energy, launched into his pitch. "Lisa, I've got an incredible investment opportunity. I need you to put $100,000 into this crypto project I've researched." I was taken aback. "Crypto? Do you understand that market?" I asked. He leaned in, animated. "Lisa, this is the future. Every year, hundreds of people become millionaires from crypto. I've done my research. This is solid." But with my background in finance, I could see it for what it was, an unrealistic gamble. I declined, but I tried to offer him an alternative. "If you're interested in the liquor business," I said, "I can help you build a solid business plan. I know people in the industry, and I'm willing to help." But the moment I suggested something more grounded, Leo shook his head and insisted, I don't want to move that slow. I want success fast, and this is the opportunity. Finally, seeing how fixated he was, I gave my answer. If it's crypto, I'm out. I can't invest in something I don't believe in. That's when my mom jumped in, clearly upset. Lisa, you've become successful, and now you look down on your brother. And my dad followed, his voice filled with disappointment. You don't want your brother to succeed more than you, is that it? Their words hit hard. I tried to explain my reasoning and tell them it wasn't personal, but it didn't matter. No matter what I said, the air between us turned cold from that day forward. Then, weeks later, after I shared the news of my promotion, they suddenly suggested the trip to Paris. And now, sitting in a hotel room in Paris, I finally saw it for what it was. I had been naive, too willing to believe in the love of my family. The trip I thought was a heartfelt gesture, was a carefully planned trap, a punishment for not buying into Leo's fantasy. While I was still lost in painful thoughts about my family's betrayal, the phone David had lent me rang again. It was Easton calling back. I picked up immediately. Before I could say a word, Easton jumped in. Lisa, I've already spoken with the bank and the embassy. Everything's in motion. Relieved, I asked. That's great. When can I get the new documents? With his usual professional tone, Easton replied, The embassy said it'll take 2 business days to issue an emergency passport. As for the money, I've sent $10,000 through Western Union. You can pick it up using the code I'll give you. As he read the code and the address of the nearest Western Union branch, I wrote everything down carefully. By the end of the call, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. After hanging up, I went out to find David and share the good news. When he saw me, he smiled and asked, Any good news? With the first genuine smile I'd had all day, I replied, Yes, my assistant sent the money. I can go pick it up and settle the room with you. But David gently shook his head and said, There's no rush. Take care of everything else first. You're safe here. His warmth left me speechless once again. I nodded, then asked if he could help call a taxi. He did, and shortly after, I was on my way to the nearest Western Union to collect the money. After picking up the money and returning to the hotel, I handed David the amount needed to cover the next few days. But he firmly refused when I tried to give him an extra $1,000 as a thank you. That's when he looked at me and said, I'm helping you because of who you are, not because I expect to be paid. His words moved me deeply, but I still wanted him to accept it. This isn't payment, I told him. It's my gratitude. I truly hope you'll accept it. No matter how much I insisted, David remained firm. He wouldn't take it. 2 days later, my new passport and replacement credit cards arrived. I immediately booked the earliest flight back to the U.S. Even though his shift had already ended that evening, David offered to take me to the airport. David and I had spent a lot of time talking during those 2 days of waiting. I'd come to admire his kindness, intelligence, and unwavering trust in someone he barely knew. A special bond had quietly formed between us. As we stood at the airport saying goodbye, I looked at him, and a quiet sadness settled in. I realized I didn't want to leave him, and maybe I had fallen for David. In that hesitant moment, I asked, Can I see you again? He paused for a few seconds, then gave a soft nod. Even though I didn't want to leave, I knew there were things I had to take care of back in the States. Before heading into the departure area, I pulled David into a tight hug and promised, I'll come back for you. And when I said those words, I knew it wasn't just something polite, it was a promise from the heart. I landed at San Francisco International Airport a little over 10 hours later. It was already 11 p.m. I went straight home and fell into my deepest sleep in days. The next morning, the first place I went wasn't the office, it was my attorney's. I had made up my mind. What my family did to me in Paris wasn't something I could forgive. There had to be legal consequences. At the office of James Thompson, my lawyer, I recounted everything. James listened carefully, without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at me seriously and asked, Lisa, are you sure you want to sue your own family? This is a step you can't undo. I didn't hesitate. I'm sure. They crossed every line. Without another word, James began preparing the paperwork. As I sat in his office, pen in hand, I felt my hand tremble momentarily. But then I thought of David's kind face and the crushing feeling of being abandoned in Paris. With quiet resolve, I signed every page. That signature was more than just legal. It was the line I drew between myself and those who had betrayed me. Once everything was signed, James placed a hand on my shoulder and said, I know this wasn't an easy decision, Lisa, but sometimes you have to protect yourself. I nodded. I gave them a chance. They chose betrayal. When James asked what I wanted to do next, I made it clear. Move forward fast. I want them to understand that actions always have consequences. Not long after the lawsuit was filed, my family started to react. The calls came in nonstop, but I was ready for it. The first call came from my mother. She was sobbing on the phone, her voice full of accusation. "Lisa, how could you do this? We're family." With a cold, steady voice, I replied, "Family doesn't leave each other stranded in a foreign country with nothing." She tried to defend herself through her tears. "It was just a joke. We didn't think it would turn out this serious." I let out a bitter laugh. "A joke? Taking my phone, passport, and money while I was in another country? That's your idea of a joke?" After my mother, it was Leo who called, furious. As soon as I answered, he started shouting, "What the hell are you doing, Lisa? Are you out of your mind? You're suing your own family?" I stayed calm. "You created this situation. Now you live with the consequences." Leo snapped, "You think you can get away with this? We're not just going to let you ruin us." At that point, I warned him clearly. "Keep threatening me. I'm recording this call." Then came my father. The man who rarely spoke suddenly called, with a sharp, cutting tone. "Lisa, you're bringing shame to this family. No child sues the people who brought her into this world." But I didn't feel guilty. I answered flatly. "Then let me remind you, no father abandons his daughter in a foreign country. You might want to get your head checked." He roared, "Lisa!" But I ended the call right there. Quietly, I had recorded every one of those calls, every threat, every insult. Now, additional evidence for the case. 2 months later, the trial occurred at the San Francisco County Court. I arrived with James Thompson carrying complete evidence, police reports from Paris, David's written statement, and the recorded phone calls with threats. When the judge delivered the verdict, his tone was stern and final. Defendants Richard Miller, Susan Miller, and Leo Miller are found guilty of theft and criminal intimidation. Hearing those words, I felt a cold sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served. After the trial, my parents and Leo received their sentences. Since they had cooperated during the investigation and technically hadn't abandoned my belongings but had instead held them, the court didn't issue the harshest penalties. Leo was sentenced to 1 year in prison. As for my parents, given their age, they received suspended sentences. In addition, they were ordered to repay all the expenses I incurred while stranded in Paris: hotel costs, emergency travel documents, and legal fees. They also had to cover James' attorney fees and compensate me for emotional distress. Altogether, it came to nearly $50,000, including civil penalties. But more important than the money, a permanent restraining order was granted. They were legally barred from ever contacting me again. I never forgot my promise to David. During the 2 months leading up to the trial, I flew to France twice to see him. The first trip happened a month after I returned to the U.S. When the plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle, my heart was pounding with anticipation. I bought a bouquet of red roses at the airport and took a cab to the hotel where David worked. I saw him standing at the front desk as I walked into the lobby. The moment his eyes met mine, they lit up with surprise. He stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward me, his voice filled with joy. "Lisa, I didn't expect you back so soon." Hearing the excitement in his voice, I handed him the flowers and said, "I told you I'd come back for you, and Lisa Miller never breaks a promise." He took the bouquet and smiled radiantly. That week we spent together was magical. David took me to his favorite restaurants in Paris. We walked along the Seine during romantic sunsets and talked for hours about life, dreams, and everything else. One evening, while we were sitting at a small cafe near Notre Dame, I looked at him and asked, "Would you be my boyfriend?" David smiled and said, "I've been waiting for you to ask me that." When he said yes, it felt like a light had turned back on inside me. I felt truly happy, for the first time since everything that happened in Paris. The second trip happened 2 months later. By then, our relationship had deepened. We spent time learning about each other's families, our pasts, and what we wanted for the future. In the following months, we stayed in touch daily, through calls, messages, and video chats. And with each one, our connection grew stronger. Then, one day, about 6 months into our relationship, I got a surprise message from David. Guess where I am? Seconds later, he sent me a selfie. Behind him was a sign, San Francisco International Airport. I stared at it in shock, then called him immediately. "Are you really in San Francisco?" With that familiar, radiant laugh, he replied, "I am. I just landed. Can you come pick me up?" I practically flew out of the office. My heart was racing as I drove as fast as I legally could to the airport. When I saw David walk out of the international arrivals gate with his small suitcase, I ran straight to him and hugged him tightly. "I can't believe you're here," I whispered. Still in my arms, he smiled and said, "I've been thinking a lot, and I realized I don't want to live without you." David stayed in the U.S. for a week to explore and get a feel for life in San Francisco. I took him everywhere, from the Golden Gate Bridge to Fisherman's Wharf, through the city's iconic hills and into its museums and galleries. While walking through Golden Gate Park one afternoon, I stopped us near Stowe Lake. With my heart full, I got down on one knee and pulled out the diamond ring I had been carrying for days. Looking into his eyes, I asked, "David, you changed my life. Will you marry me?" He gasped, covering his mouth, eyes brimming with tears. And then, after a pause that felt like forever, he nodded and said, "Yes, I will." It was the happiest moment of my life since everything that had happened in Paris. And as I slipped the ring onto David's finger, I knew. I had found the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. 3 months later, David officially moved to the U.S. We moved in together and started preparing for our dream wedding. The ceremony was held at a beautiful resort in Napa Valley, with only close friends and colleagues in attendance. I didn't invite a single member of my family. When a few distant relatives called to complain about the lack of family presence, I told them bluntly, "This is my life, and I'm going to live it on my terms." After the wedding, we chose Hawaii for our honeymoon. It was an incredible week in paradise. When we returned to San Francisco, I thought our married life would finally settle into peace. But I was wrong. Shortly after we returned, the doorbell rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon. When I opened the door, my parents stood on the doorstep, looking exhausted and desperate. It had been over a year since I'd last seen them. The sight shocked me. They looked so much older. My father had lost weight, and my mother's hair had new streaks of gray. Before I could say anything, my mother burst into tears and pleaded, "Lisa, you have to help us. We're about to lose the house." I stayed cold and composed, reminding them, "I believe the restraining order is still in effect." When I mentioned the order, my father lowered his head and admitted, "We know, but this is an emergency. Lisa, we need $300,000 to save the house." Stunned by the number, I asked, "$300? Why that much?" With a voice full of shame, my mother confessed the truth. "After you refused to invest in Leo, we secretly took out a mortgage on the house to fund his crypto venture." Hearing that, I couldn't help but feel the bitter irony of the situation. My father added, "It's all gone now. After a year, the money's gone. We can't keep up with the interest, and the bank is threatening foreclosure." I shook my head and answered firmly, "I can't help you." Desperate, my mother offered another option. "Then maybe you could buy the house from us for $350,000. We'd stay and pay you $1,000 in rent each month." I gave a bitter laugh and replied flatly, "I have no interest in buying back a house filled with painful memories." And with that final refusal, I closed the door and left them to figure things out independently. It may not have seemed kind, but I wasn't willing to return to a past where I was nothing more than someone to be used. After I refused to help them, my family decided to play their last card. They sold their version of the story to a local tabloid. It was published under a sensational headline, "Cold-blooded millionaire CFO abandons her struggling family." When I read the article, I saw how shamelessly they had twisted the truth. After achieving success, they painted me as greedy, heartless, and disconnected from my roots. They entirely omitted the fact that they had abandoned me in Paris, and the real reasons behind our estrangement. But I had learned how to deal with attacks like this. Instead of getting dragged into a mudslinging match, I let my legal team handle it. James Thompson issued a single press statement, concise, professional, and backed with solid evidence. The release included a copy of the police report I filed in Paris, an affidavit from David detailing the events at the hotel, documentation from the U.S. Embassy regarding the issuance of an emergency passport, and most importantly, audio recordings of the threatening phone calls I had received. Once that statement went public, the narrative flipped almost instantly. Public opinion shifted in my favor. People condemned my family's behavior, and the attempt to smear my name backfired spectacularly. Humiliated, my family retreated from the spotlight. But the fallout didn't end there. One night, riled up by the media circus, a group of distant, overly emotional relatives showed up outside my home. They stood on the sidewalk shouting, "Lisa Miller, come out, we want answers." I looked out the window and saw a crowd of about 10 people yelling aggressively. I immediately called 911. The dispatcher asked, "Do you feel threatened, ma'am?" In a calm voice, I replied, "Yes, they're gathered illegally outside my home, shouting threats." 10 minutes later, the police arrived and broke up the gathering. The officer in charge approached me and said, "We've logged the incident. If they return, call us right away." When he asked if I wanted to file charges, I shook my head and answered, "No need. I want them to understand the law is on my side." After the wave of back-to-back crises, from my family begging at my doorstep to the media attacks to the protests outside my home, I felt drained, completely worn out. 2 months later, David and I sold the old house and moved to a new part of San Francisco, the Mission District. It was a vibrant neighborhood, full of young families. And best of all, no one knew our story. At the same time, I changed my phone number and personal email address. I wanted a clean break from the past. Total disconnection. On the day we moved into our new home, a charming Victorian with a small garden out front, David had a surprise for me. When I got home from work, he greeted me at the door with a mysterious smile. He led me into the living room and said, "I have a special gift to celebrate the new house." He handed me a small, carefully wrapped box. When I opened it, inside was a black and white ultrasound image. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at, but it hit me as I looked closer and saw the words 12 weeks printed on the image. With a shaky voice, overwhelmed, I asked, "You're serious? This isn't a joke, right?" David nodded, his eyes glowing. "We're going to have a baby." In that moment, I broke down in tears. Tears of happiness. The first I'd shed since everything that happened in Paris. I held David tight and whispered, "Thank you. You've given me a real family." But underneath that joy, there was a faint thread of fear, a quiet, nagging thought that the past might one day find its way back and hurt the child growing inside me. That night, lying in bed, I made a silent vow. I would do everything in my power to protect this new family. This child would grow up surrounded by love and safety, never having to endure the chaos, betrayal, and pain I once knew. I went through my pregnancy smoothly, with David by my side every step of the way. I was involved every step of the way, from every routine checkup to setting up the nursery. We decided not to find out the baby's gender until the birth, wanting it to be a surprise. 6 months after we moved, on an early morning in March, I went into labor. After 12 hours, Sawyer Miller was born, a healthy baby boy with wide, curious eyes, just like his father's. When the doctor placed Sawyer into my arms, I felt a powerful love I'd never known. Looking at his tiny face, I whispered, "Hi there. Mommy's going to protect you. Always." From the moment Sawyer came into our lives, everything changed. I became the kind of mother I never imagined I could be. Every morning before work, I'd wake up early to feed him and change his diaper. After work, the first thing I did when I got home was hold him and ask David how their day had been. Evenings quickly became my favorite time of day. I'd bathe Sawyer, make his bottle, and rock him to sleep with lullabies David had taught me. Watching him drift off in my arms, I realized sometimes happiness is beautifully simple. When Sawyer turned 1 and started learning to walk, I spent every spare moment with him. We built sandcastles in the backyard. I taught him his first words, and I couldn't stop laughing as he waddled across the grass, determined to take each tiny, unsteady step. I thought life would stay peaceful like that, simple, joyful, whole. But 3 days ago, everything shifted. The day my parents came knocking again. As I stepped out to the gate with a heavy heart, I saw Richard and Susan Miller standing on the other side. It had been 3 years. They looked older, worn. When my mother saw me, she began to cry. Her voice shook as she pleaded, "Lisa, we know we were wrong. We want to see our grandson, just once. That's all we ask." I stood there in silence, my face unreadable, but inside, the memories of Paris came flooding back like a storm. Then my father spoke, his voice raspy and thick with emotion. "Lisa, we made mistakes. We regret everything. Please give us one last chance." But I didn't move. I didn't speak. The wounds were still too deep. Before I could say no, David stepped out behind me, cradling Sawyer in his arms. He stood by my side, then gently stepped before me, shielding me with quiet strength. Looking my parents straight in the eye, his voice calm but firm, he said, "I don't want my son to grow up knowing that his grandparents once abandoned his mother in a foreign country, with nothing." With that, David turned and led me back inside. He closed the door quietly, but decisively. That door didn't just shut in their faces. It shut off an entire past filled with pain. Inside, I pulled David into my arms and whispered, "Thank you. You protected our family." He smiled and replied, "It's what you would have done if this were my family. We protect each other." Looking at him with deep, quiet gratitude, I said, "You've shown me what family means." Even though I've closed the door on the past, There are still questions in my heart that don't have easy answers. Tonight, as I watch David sleeping beside me and listen to Sawyer's steady breathing from the next room, I feel a deep, quiet peace. This is my real family. The people who stand by, protect, and love me without conditions. Maybe my story doesn't have the ending people hoped for. There was no tearful forgiveness, no warm reunion. But that's real life. Not every relationship can be saved. Not every wound can be healed. What matters is knowing when to let go, when to protect yourself, and when to choose happiness over obligation. That's where my story ends. But before I close this chapter, I want to ask you, was I wrong to take my parents to court 3 years ago? Was I wrong to refuse their plea to see their grandson just once? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to support us. Take care, and I'll see you in the following story.